All right, we'll be beginning. Good evening and welcome back to the 10th edition of the Annual Academic Conference 2021, organized by the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Madras. The third panel for today will be Street Life, Commerce and Mobility, moderated by Professor Matangi Krishnamurthy of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Madras. Let me take this opportunity to now introduce the panelists. ANISA BHUTIA, a doctoral scholar in social sciences from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, will be presenting her paper titled Chokepoints, Roads, Infrastructure and Streets in the Hilly town of Kalimpong. Following her will be Soumita Mazumder, a doctoral scholar in modern history from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, speaking on her paper Obstruction, Congestion and Nuisance, Many Faces of Calcutta Streets. Panelists will be given 15 minutes to present the paper. Panelists who would like to present a presentation or paper to the audience, please inform your moderator and you will be given presenter access. After the completion of all panelists, the moderator will ask their questions, followed by questions from the members of the panel, followed by members of the audience through the chat box. The session will conclude with the closing remarks by the moderator. The session is recorded for archival purposes. Use of derogatory or offensive language is strictly prohibited and will attract serious action. I now leave the floor to Professor Matangi Krishnamurthy to moderate the panel, Street Life, Commerce and Mobility.
Thank you very much, Devika. Hello all, good afternoon. Welcome to this unprecedented online panel, the third of the day. So I want to thank you all for being here and for joining us for what promises to be a really exciting panel on street life, commerce and mobility, aspects of the world that we are sadly missing these days, despite the fact of the second wave proving testimony to not enough people paying attention to lack of street life. Welcome to both the panelists, and without further ado, I invite you to make your presentations, following which I will hopefully invite more discussion, have comments for you, and we'll have a wonderful, quick conversation. As has been mentioned, please do try and stay within 15 minutes to allow for further discussion. But since we are two panelists on this hour-long session, a few minutes here and there will not make a difference. I look forward to your papers. ANISA, all yours.
Thank you so much, Professor. Firstly, am I audible? Because sometimes it feels like talking to myself. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for organizing this conference, the whole team, and thank you, Professor, for taking time to reading. Also, hopefully it made sense. So I'm just gonna go right into it. So my paper is titled Chokepoints, Roads, Infrastructure and Streets, the town of Kalimpong. So now I begin. Everyone was wondering how to deal with the lockdown, but the people of Kalimpong were used to it. What they were hinting at was the 104-day strike in the year 2017, demanding a separate state called Gorkhaland. Apart from the people and their everyday interaction in the streets, there was no other movement in the hills. It was when one of my respondents mentioned this to me, I started thinking about the idea of restrictions, which are sometimes institutional and sometimes even personal. And this made me delve deeper on the idea of choke points. Choke point refers to a constriction of some sort in terms of networks, systems, or processes. The term originated a century ago in engineering, whereby it was used to describe locations in a mechanical system where fluid could be controlled or choked. According to Kars et al. 2020, choke point in anthropology places an important consideration to the consequences of global circulation and flows. Now, critical exploration of the study of flows has led to the emergence of works on infrastructure, whereby development of roads is not just merely for development, but also for other political motivation. In Kalimpong, my respondent mentioned the roads has been built during the election time and it will be developed again in the next election. So it's like it's a given in a way. Now, Middleton 2020 further argues that in order to understand choke point better, we need to explore the movement and specifically movement through. Now, I argue that it's not just through, but also where the choke point takes place, right? And it is when we engage with this where that we find the story of how spaces were built and how people negotiate with it over a period of time. It is while exploring the movement through that I realized that all the goods, commodities, and people were moving in different infrastructures, particularly roads. But when we mention roads, it is important for us to also understand that the imagination of roads are different through different landscapes. In the mountainous region, different understanding of static sometimes emerges and even reframes the queries, like what is street. For example, all streets are roads, but roads are not streets. This distinction becomes further messy when one starts interrogating the road network of the hill stations in India, which act like central state and local people at various streets. Now, taking the case of the Kalimpong town located in the Indian-Bhutan border, we explore the streets which are lined by buildings on both sides. The street is also the only state highway passing through this town. This highway has taken different forms over a period of time. The street becomes a road that takes the tourists, grocery, jeeps, army trucks, and during the many strikes for its separate statehood and the current coronavirus pandemic, it becomes the playground for children, a meeting point for the old folks, and a space to catch up on the gossip of the area. What if there were a grammar to the type of roads we drive every day? Asks Edward and Barton, 2014. Further, they elaborate on why a particular place is called a street, road, boulevard, pavement, etc. Appadurai acknowledges that it was in semi-insulated zones of small towns that led to the historical beginning of the street culture. Now, this different conception and terminology works well in a planned city and neighborhood. Furthermore, I believe they are Western concepts that I think does not fit well with my field site. It is not to say that Kalimpong as a place was not planned. It was deliberately built through its various infrastructures during the British Empire. Through the pretext of connectivity, these infrastructures, particularly ropeway, bridges, and roads, were built to govern the so-called no man's land. It did help the commuters as it saved time, but it also acted as an important first step in the colonization of the whole North Bengal hills. The development of infrastructure has colonial origin in many parts of India. Zubichu 2013 explores road making as an important function in controlling and governing the hill communities. Further, he claims the routes that the roads formed ultimately led to the inclusion of Naga Hills as a political entity of the British Raj. In similar lines, Zipao 2020 argues that building an extension of roads into tribal territories by the British was an intrinsic part of the colonization process in Manipur. Further, according to Ahuja 2009, a road was not just a road, but a means of circulation if integrated with the logistic infrastructure of production. In this scenario, in Kalimpong, roads became an important infrastructure along to produce capital through the Tibetan trade route. The flow of goods, ideas, and communication has been an age-old phenomenon in the town, especially from its Lhasa-Kalimpong trade route. All the movement would lead towards the 10th mile. Now, people trading from and to Tibet would make their way to this place. Now, this movement of different people resulted in a settlement of different migrant communities in this area. And here, the relation between restriction and circulation becomes important. It's interesting to see where certain things get restricted. Now, during the pandemic, people's movement were restricted. Instances in villages whereby roads being blocked by a bamboo, where it was a very common phenomena. Roads, when stopped in this manner, becomes an infrastructure that is also used to restrict flow of people and goods. Now, when this restriction takes place, there are new forms of engagements that starts taking place in such sites. Deserto argues that it is the street stories that brings out the everyday lived lives of the people. These stories get shifted and intertwined with the infrastructure. As the roads approach the 10th mile in the Kalimpong town, it has also become a street somehow lined up with the buildings on both sides, a usual understanding of the idea of what a street is supposed to represent. Majumdar has also argued that the development of roads led to the direct development of the Kalimpong town. Now, this development was very much linked to the idea of Tibetan trade. The culmination of this Tibetan trade took place at the 10th mile, a place where the Hat Bazaar is also located, Hat being a bi weekly open air market. Now, here I invoke Anand's 2015 argument that infrastructure is a material articulation of imaginations, ideology, and social life. Further, he argues, along with where, it is equally important to understand when were these infrastructures built. Harvey and Knox 2015, through their road construction study in Peru, explores the importance of roads in shaping the territory and economy of the region. Development of roads have largely been seen as something that brings with it the promise of modernity and better life. Now, according to Saxon 2016, the international press has been equally critical of Himalayan roads, although along slightly different lines. Roads, it is assumed, will put an end to traditional ways of life. Similarly, Demenge 2013 argues that in Ladakh, recent road constructions has not increased mobility. But what all literature on roads does not engage with is that the roads are of different styles that varies with landscape and the region. Now I elaborate a bit on my field site, its landscape, and the different representation of the 10th mile. There is one major road called as the Rishi Road that starts from Chitre till Kalimpong. Chitre is a point from where you have to come towards Kalimpong. The long stretch of roads are known by miles, and my field site is the 10th mile, the site where the heart also takes place. As the road reaches the main town in a place called Thandara, it's a particular site, you see different bifurcations of road taking place at that juncture. It's almost like resembling a rhizome. They spread all across the landscape. One stretch of the road takes you to the 10th mile, the other towards the motor stand, another in Kalimpong College, all moving across simply like in different directions. But as it is a hill station, there are also parallel roads going through that is largely called as the upper 10th mile and the lower 10th mile. This parallel roads was what I frequented during my year-long fieldwork in the year 2019. On the bi-weekly hard days, there is a rush in these roads, the lower road, which is called our cemetery road, and the upper road, which is called the Rishi Road, as I mentioned. It is here that the binary of restriction and flow comes to play. Like the villagers come with their produce to sell goods in this particular hut area. The width of the road is narrow, and people complain about the densification and lack of space. But the interplay between chokes in the form of restrictions and flow comes to play in such sites, largely where the markets are located. These are places where infrastructures are built and they accrued over a period of time. Whenever anyone heard about my research site and my interest in the Tibetan trade, they would be like, you chose a right spot. So, what was so right about this place, about the 10th mile? A deeper dive into a close analysis of my field data had the answer. The site had become a place where this so called Tibetan market used to take place. It is here that the infrastructure, people, produce, and commodities all came together and stuck. Everything flows in this direction. It is in this market that the raw materials for the Tibetan material culture comes from areas like Gujarat and Surat. Now, Webeck's 2016 considered Kalimpong as an important node to the trade of Tibet through transfer of various goods. But the Sino-Indian War of 1962 choked this flow, at least in the public memory of the town. Chokepoints are volatile and always affected by this change. But one of my respondents who works on particularly making the Tibetan prayer flag seems unaffected by these restrictions. She just plainly mentioned that when the border closed, what happened was the route of the trade shifted, but the trade still continued. She further clarified when I asked her what did she mean by that. She said that the road changed, but the trade carried on. The Rishi Road was one of the places where this person works. She mentioned that this is the place which has very few remaining Tibetan traditional shop, whereas the RC Mintri Road, which is below, parallel to the Rishi Road, is largely considered as the Marwari line because many Marwari traders had built their houses and are settled in this part. Now, a walk in the Rishi Road is enough to show you the confluence of vehicles, shops, people, stray dogs, cats, and even monkeys these days. They are visited quite often, frankly. But this highway takes different forms in different times of the year. During the tourist season of March to May or September to November, the street becomes a road that takes the tourist to sightseeings of Kalimpong. Now, during the mundane everyday, the trucks bring groceries for the shops. During my many walks in the Rishi Road, I saw tourist vehicles, army trucks, commuter jeeps from the nearby villages that are parked all across the town. In the cold winters of December to February, the Rishi Road becomes a place where you get to see one or two street vendors selling warm foods like chow mein and chow mein and bhajiyas, etc. You know, on one of my field days, I was even surprised to see someone selling dosa, like because it's usually not consumed in this part. Further, in the Diwali festival, this road transforms itself with lights and children bursting crackers. On one of my fieldwork days, as I was approaching the road, a lady told me better avoid this road as there'll be many such crackling noises on it right now, and you do not want to get into it. Now, during the Durga Puja, pandals are also built on these roads. Now, the space then becomes a merging place of religion, people, and economy. Now, further, this streets transforms into a public place where even I have enjoyed playing major sports like basketball and badminton on the road itself. For the basketball, we did not have a hoop, but we used to keep a tab on the scores. If someone hit on one wall in one building, the wall which was chosen was one of our friend's house, and we had taken prior permission, so there was nothing to worry on that. For badminton, we used to draw a line with brick in the roads and play without a net. For both the times, we used to take a break whenever any vehicles would honk at us. Though dangerous, but there were less cars prior to 2000, at least in comparison to what I see right now. It was our road, it was our street, it was our park, and it was our playground, whatever you'd like to call it. Now, similar to the street vendors, there are some houses, that have opened small shops in very small shortcuts, like the lower and the upper end. So how do you reach that place is through small shortcuts, through small stairs that are there. So what people have done is people have opened small shops on those shortcuts as well to earn a livelihood. I see these shortcuts as almost equivalent to streets in the form of how Appadurai mentions that there being a lack of public and private in the streets. After all, streets are places where commerce, people, and culture come together. Here, the door of your house will be very close to another house, and possibly strangers walk up and down every single day. As conversation with neighbors becomes a must, either due to clogged drains or sometimes no drains as well, asking for directions or just hanging out waiting for something exciting to happen. Now, a clear demarcation of the road and streets is difficult in such spaces. And let's not forget that this road is also the state highway, uh, to be specific, State Highway 12. Now, due to rampant urbanization of Kalimpong, the State Highway 12 does seem narrow when it reaches the town. The State Highway 12 originates from Naxalbari and passes through Kalimpong before terminating a little beyond Alipurdwar in West Bengal. The total length of State Highway is 352 kilometers, uh, out of which approximately 100 kilometers it crosses in the district Kalimpong. Now, the road that I'm discussing as having transformed to streets is the lower Rishi and the upper Rishi road specifically when one reaches the market area of the town. Now, when you walk in this road, it does seem congested as not only the infrastructure, but also the vehicles have increased in number and are parked right besides the road, further narrowing the width. Uh, During the 104-day strikes in 2017, the vehicles were not allowed to pass through the road, and it was a way to restrict the flow of vehicles and using the state's infrastructure against them. Because it is only through such acts the state and the national actor have paid some attention to the demand of the people in this region. It is only when there are certain restrictions that are posed to such places that it becomes prominent. Because where does this constriction of circulation manifest itself? Where does it manifest physically? It is in these infrastructure, in the roads and in the streets. You see the fights, you see conversations, you see all these issues that are coming up. And what changes at that particular point of time is the speed and the time of this flow. In anthropological conception of choke points, we see a different understanding of circulation, where the movement of people, commodities, and information is neither fluid nor obstructed, but somewhere in between, filtered, controlled, and choked in ways that ripples across space. Through this article, I've shown that how the distinction between a road and a street is difficult in Kalimpong. I hope I've made it further messy. Like, like what is road, what is streets. The roads are narrow, and what one would consider streets in metropolitan cities like Bombay, Delhi, Calcutta, etc., could easily be considered roads in Kalimpong. Now, in order to make a living, the narrow space in between the roads and the pavement are transformed into a place of transaction where the villagers sell their produce. It is on the way to the heart and market you meet relatives, neighbors, or just a familiar face of a woman who sells in the heart. It is not just a place to get one's produce for home, but it is also a place where social relations are formed. Now, these are the social life streets of Kalimpong, that is entangled markets. Thank you very much. I look forward to your comments. I hope I made some sense. Yeah.
Thank you, Anisha. That was excellent. I also read your paper with great interest. So I'm very pleased to sort of note the continuities and also given me more room for thought. So thank you so much. We will soon have discussion on your paper post the second presentation. Thank you again. Can I invite Soumita to present the second paper, please?
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all to this session, and I thank you for the organizers for having this event in such unprecedented times. So I now begin my paper, which is titled Obstruction, Congestion, Nuisance, Many Faces of Calcutta Streets. So it talks about the late colonial Calcutta, the first half of the 20th century. Historically speaking, Calcutta and its pavements manifested various range of activities. It was a vibrant milieu that catered to the necessities, luxuries, and recreations of Bengali elite, middle, and even lower class households. The social and economic ethos triggered questions on the persistent issues of authorized and unauthorized occupancy of public street spaces. The annual reports of British Business Association, Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry repeatedly highlighted the condition of Clive Street, popularly referred as the Grand Theatre of Business. As the hub of European trade, headquarters of Bengal Chamber of Commerce and managing agencies like Gillanders and Arbuthnot, McLeod and Company, it attracted major attention in the matters of civic affairs. The chamber representatives described the sidewalks as a veritable bazaar where many hawkers allegedly defied municipal regulations. Merchants frequenting their offices in Clive Row, Royal Exchange Place, resented to the police about the difficulty in walking on the footpaths. In response to such transformation of the pavements, they often appealed to the government and Calcutta Municipal Corporation to restrict the number of street vending licenses. In 1930, Police Commissioner L.H. Colson prohibited assembly of people on the public thoroughfares for the purpose of share trading or auctions and other similar activities. The European business community saw the announcement as a motivated move to deal with the intolerable nuisance prevalent in the Clive Street area. Alongside, the elite public sphere regularly wrote to the newspapers like Amrita Bazar Patrika, Statesman, about the nuisance of lepers and diseased beggars on the pavements, highlighting the hygiene hazards and visual obscenity. The motorists and the pedestrians consistently complained that unlawful use of roads and pavements by fruit sellers, vegetable vendors, barbers, cobblers, and many more created difficulty in their movements. Motorists contended that such conflation of spaces defying the idea of zoning triggered perils. This paper is a reflection on the everyday public life of Calcutta in the first half of the 20th century. It tries to explore the different hues of city streets through the prism of vehicular movement. The larger aim is to understand the ways in which traffic circulation and transport means modified spatial arrangements in the late colonial city. From the early 20th century, Calcutta underwent institutionalized urban planning and expansion. The establishment of Calcutta Improvement Trust, that is CIT, in 1912 envisaged the remodeling of the city along the lines of Haussmannian Paris, promised to obliterate insanitary living conditions and build new streets. For administrative necessities, the colonial government in the early 1900s introduced categories of main streets and side streets. There were busy thoroughfares, arterial roads, quaint streets running from north to south, connecting the suburbs and neighborhoods. In the opinion of CIT planners and engineers like E.P. Richards, James Madden, A.D. Boy Shrewsbury, the city streets resembled an intricate web, generally ill-built, narrow, and incapable of accommodating heavy pedestrian and vehicular traffic. In the official and public circles, the city was equally infamous for its slow and chaotic nature of traffic. Arguably, a state of high traffic density and poor traffic flow and low average speed identified quintessential Calcutta streets. From official correspondence to government reports, planning records, and private individual accounts, the words which consistently describe the city's street scenes and traffic pace were obstruction, nuisance, and congestion. The reason of such characterization was primarily the mixed nature of traffic, that is, motorized and non-motorized vehicles. In 1928, a British visitor, Aliston Macmillan, on the first visit to Calcutta while describing Bara Bazar, the largest and busiest indigenous hub of the city, tried to capture that essence. Bullock, I start quote, Bullock and buffalo-drawn carts, heavily laden, compete with office-drawn, that is the Calcutta box curries, motor cars, rickshaws, and pedestrians for the right of way. And when an accident occurs or a cart comes to unload, gets at right angle to the traffic, pandemonium reigns supreme. Quote ends. Against such a backdrop, I ask how phenomenon of obstruction, congestion, and nuisance defined the relationship between traffic circulation and public streets. These words generated perceptions of crowd and behavioral tendencies in public streets. I use them as tools to analyze the correlation between traffic control and space management. This paper therefore argues that the attributes helped to enforce the process of zoning in the city, strived to create prohibitive and controlled street spaces. This was evident in the parking norms for vehicles, institution of one-way, diversion routes, and how different streets became restricted to buses, motor lorries, and carts. Within the traffic grid of Calcutta, conditional accessibility, that is entry-exit directions, time regulations for different vehicles became identifier of the streets. At the official level, the words nuisance, obstruction, and congestion were interchangeably used. Correspondences between police department and the Home Office applied the terms to portray a state of stagnancy, chaotic and disorderly condition of the city streets. I do not particularly challenge this simplistic application. I do not claim that they refer to drastically different situations. I advance that obstruction, congestion, and nuisance were loaded terms signifying layered traffic and transport conditions. They presented a nuanced portrayal of the city streets. This paper therefore shows how interplay of class notions, popular practices, and business motivations define street experiences and spatial relationships. Obstruction was both mobile and immobile in nature, from littered baggage, bricks, garbage to wandering cattle. Studies by Michael Anderson and Ritojyoti Bandopadhyay on fishing practices in colonial India and street vendors in post-partition Calcutta have contributed in the scholarly debate on obstruction. Drawing from them, I show that in public streets of Calcutta, the notion and experience of nuisance remain varied. For instance, in 1935, E.T. McCluskey, a European representative in the Bengal Legislative Council, tagged the tingling sound of rickshaw bells as a source of nuisance and irritation to hospital patients and residents living in houses on the main roads. Since the introduction in the 1920s, hand-pulled rickshaws were very popular among the masses for its cheap fare, availability, and easy mobility in the narrow lanes and bylanes of Calcutta, especially during the monsoon seasons. The very opinion therefore reflected at the class entitlements trying to influence the idea of nuisance. On similar lines, prowling taxis and their drivers blowing incessant horns to attract passengers became the symbol of annoyance and nuisance in the streets. The police commissioners from time to time observed that loitering cabs added traffic congestion and posed danger to the public. The entitled members of Bengal Chamber of Commerce argued that the cab drivers and drivers of public vehicles in general were not educated enough to realize the appropriate and optimum use of motor horns. Apparently, horns were blown during the night when human and vehicular presence on the streets receded. This sound, they complained, interfered with the general pace of the roads and residential localities. In a similar manner, in 1935, residents of Amratola Street near Bara Bazar requested Commissioner L.H. Colson to abolish a cart stand in the neighborhood. It shared space with a taxi and rickshaw stand. The letter clearly spelled out that the carts had no use to them, unlike the other two vehicles, and in addition, it brought the problems of unyoked animals and unknown carters visiting the locality. Clearly, they saw these commercial vehicles as intruder, which aimed at disrupting the social and class fabric of residential streets. Here, vehicles and nuisance emerge as the marker of closed and intimate spaces. In case of traffic circulation, the common perception of obstruction, congestion, and nuisance was almost always in relation to motor vehicles navigation. Administrative officials, traffic police, merchant bodies, public associations wished for ceaseless mobility of automobiles. Accordingly, they determined obstructive forces and congestion points. Like in 1915, European Association, Bengal Chamber of Commerce wrote to the Calcutta Corporation highlighting the slow pace of tramway tracks repairing at the junction of Rasa Road and Tollygunj Road. So in the early 20th century, this Rasa Road served as the primary thoroughfare for the south suburban traffic. So the representation resented that excavated road surface, heap of earth and metal scattered here and there created hindrance in the motion of vehicles. From the vantage point of the traffic constables and vehicular management, random haphazard parking of motor cars, carts and horse carriages on the both sides of the street was the most common cause of congestion. This was a common problem across the residential and business quarters of the town. In 1930, a letter to the editor of the Statesman echoed that it was quite impossible to navigate near the Calcutta High Court entrance daily around the afternoon time due to overwhelming number of motor cars and taxis. Again, the junction of Clive Street with Clive Row and Royal Exchange Place, which appeared as a bottleneck, remained most crowded from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. The annual proceedings of Bengal Chamber of Commerce repeatedly observed that this everyday congestion was largely a result of indiscriminate parking of automobiles owned by merchants belonging to firms in that locality. For the purpose of dealing with the irregularities and to order congestion, Calcutta police developed parking norms which enforced the idea of zoning and exhibited meticulous space management. Avadhendra Sharan, in his essay on urban modernity and environmental debates in Delhi, shows how the colonial administration employed the trope of nuisance and congestion to alter city spaces and deal with indigenous population. Based on that premise, I show that the traffic department intermittently issued elaborate and distinct guiding instructions for all private motor cars, private horse carriages, taxi cabs, and hackney carriages visiting theatre halls, clubs, Eden Gardens, places of worship, and educational institutes, thus creating a separate zone, a separate sphere of movement and halting for different class of vehicles. This zone segregation, I argue, between public and private vehicles sealed lines of class division in public spaces. The general instructions of parking vehicles, that is parallel along the curb or on one side in single line, attempted to create geometric semblance. It testified a mathematical envisioning of the city streets. However, some streets around the busy thoroughfares like that of Harrison Road, Bobazar Street in the Indian quarters became no parking zones, whereas others around the same place became the state-sanctioned parking spaces. In the epicenter of British Raj in Calcutta, that is Chowringhee, Dalhousie Square, Clive Street, the issue of congestion was so immense that 1 hour parking rule was applied. This was an attempt, I argue, of the colonial state to engage and define spatiality in relation with time. Generally, Calcutta Police's traffic regulations divided the public streets into two sides, the left and the right. The former meant for bicycle, horse carriages, animal and hand carts, while the latter was reserved for the motor cars. This spatial distinction represented the contrast between the fast and the slow-moving vehicles. Further traffic rules designated the left side of the streets for driving the herd of cattle or stopping for any vehicle. Between the pavement and the right side reserved for the pedestrians and motor vehicles, the left side emerged as a liminal preventive zone. It accommodated the slow-paced vehicles, the potential obstructive elements, stopping them from interfering with the motion of the automobiles. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, Calcutta Police experimented with one-ways, diversion routes, and time regulations as possible strategies to reduce congestion. These methods were employed to speed up the movement of cattle, freight, and motorized and non-motorized transport. The officials identified different streets, junctions as pressure points and diverted vehicles to maintain a balance. For instance, during the Second World War, the vicinity of Dalhousie Square became one way to facilitate movement of military vehicles around Fort William and use of Maidan roads as English and American airways. Such extraordinary moments defined how prioritizing circulation of military vehicles questioned civilian claims over public streets. However, often the system of route diversion did not go well with the motorists as they complained of detours, delays, and inconvenience. One finds such grievance letters published in Statesman and Amrita Bazar Patrika, Jugantar. Even at the governmental level, there were apprehensions that diversion from one route to another increased pressure on the already crowded streets. But prohibitive passage and controlled movement appeared as the only remedy to congested and obstructive streets. The rules of road incumbent on the handcarts, bullock carts, and motor lorries forms an interesting study on relationship between space management and vehicular movement. The dominant perception of Bengal government and Calcutta police and business houses branded animal and handcarts as the most contentious symbol of obstruction. Any deliberation assessing the traffic condition placed them as nuisance and the principal reason impending vehicular and human movement. None of their sizes and speed was compatible with the traffic circulation that CIT had envisioned for Calcutta. Moreover, the hard iron wheels of carts were absolutely not preferable for the 20th century asphalted roads getting ready for the pneumatic motor tires. The loaded handcarts were also a potent source of accidents. Often due to overloading, the rear attendants could not see ahead, hence disregarded humans and vehicles approaching them from front and ignored police signals. Many European managing agencies demanded to the police to ban the use of carts in Calcutta, but that seemed an impossible proposition. Bullock and handcarts, as E.P. Richards observed in his survey reports, were the chief transport unit of Calcutta. That was primarily because they were cheap and they had the low cost of maintenance and they could easily access the narrow business streets in Barabazar and Dalhousie Square. After the First World War years, the Bengal government and police administration anticipated that the motor lorries would emerge as a cheaper alternative in this local trade structure and transport arrangements. However, the prediction was not entirely correct. The speed of heavy motor lorries was inappropriate for the general conditions of Calcutta streets. Therefore, we see that police file recorded that during the loading and unloading of goods caused obstruction and inconvenience to other traffic in the narrow street spaces. Thus, motor lorries became more involved in the long-distance freight transport, and the car traffic remained an integral part of Calcutta because of mercantile endeavors. For the regulation of these agents' obstructions, street spaces further evolved as restrictive lands. For instance, between 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., lorry traffic could not avail the Red Road in Maidan, Strand Road, and Chorangi Road. Similarly, no bullock and buffalo carts could proceed along these roads in the vicinity of Chorangi and Howrah Bridge between this 8:30 a.m., 10:30 a.m., 5 p.m., and 6 p.m. So these different kinds of timing evolved. These were also the hours when the office-going commuter crowd were at the height of their movement. Conditional accessibility bound by the time manifested, therefore, the official attempt to distinguish the street space for public transport and freight. It seemed like whenever both of them overlapped, chaos and disorder, nuisance, congestion emerged. However, the mercantile firms affiliated to the Bengal Chamber of Commerce, they protested against Calcutta Police's selective passage rules. The regulation posed direct consequences on the easy transportation of materials to the dock for shipment and vice versa. So the committee made it very clear that the roads and streets leading to the Kidipur dock or Howrah and Sealdah stations should always be open to motor lorries and accessible to traffic goods. So just to sum up quickly, the physical expanse of the streets contained different kinds of features. On one hand, there were pedestrian crossings, traffic islands to ensure road safety. On the other hand, there were built structures like bus stops, tram terminus, taxi cabs, and hackney cab stands, which exemplified space management for passenger facilities. This paper argued that traffic imperatives generated layered spaces where one permeated into another within the realm of that tangible space. Some of them were conflicting and some overlapping. Police injunctions, government orders transformed streets into restricted, regulated, measured, and selective spaces for vehicles and road users. While some vehicles got measured access, others had free run. Streets become the domain for establishing competing claims, often the flashpoint between the colonial state and the public. There are newspaper reports across years to show how prosecution in obstruction cases became a point of tension involving cart pullers, helpers, traders, and police constables. They often led to confrontation between the officials and the offenders. Interplay of all such factors therefore structured the spatial history of traffic administration in late colonial Calcutta. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Soumita. That was fantastic. Really beautifully elucidated. And I'm quite looking forward to discussing each of your papers together and separately. Could I ask ANISA to also put on your video? ANISA, are you here? Just so we can put faces onto voices. There we go. All right, great papers, both of you. And I'm going to suggest a slight inversion because I think I do have some questions for you. A lot to do with your larger projects as well as how does this fit into the grid of larger research, which is, of course, always a quandary, right? We get to present one part of our research, but there's such a big story. So I will come to that, but I just thought let's start with audience questions. I'm sure people have heard both your wonderful presentations. Maybe we can collect them and I can wrap those questions up into my comments and then ask you both to address them. HSS team, does that sound like a plan?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Whoever has questions, if you want to put a hand up.
Yeah, she's raised her hand up.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can unmute and ask your question.
Hello? Hello?
You're audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
So Thank you for both of your presentations. So regarding the first presentation, I would just like to ask a couple of questions. That is, when you were talking about choke points, roads being choke points, I would just like to refer to Karl Marx's work on Grundrisse, where he talks about annihilation of space by time. So even David Harvey talks about how you need to fix a particular location in space as a spatial fix. You need to overcome the geographical and temporal distances so that you can continue the accumulative process of capitalism, capitalist expansion. So don't you think that that can be another trope of looking towards the point which you are hinting as a choke point? For example, we all know how the chicken snake is acting as an extremely important geopolitical corridor today. And secondly, in relation to your paper of roads, I would just like to point out towards Stacy Peak's work on the language of Vikas and development in Nepal, where she talks about how roads and infrastructure extends to rural villages in Nepal, and how a kind of image of a village is constructed with the help of developmental agencies and also with governmental, and how that is promulgated in school textbooks to construct an ideal image of a village, and all kind of heterogeneous villages are clubbed into that. So, and that is how social categories in Nepal are getting created. And there are many people who are getting benefited from this, because like we know from empirical data released by different agencies, by the IMF, by the ILO. So how would you like
Atreya,
to...
can I interrupt? What is
Yeah.
the question?
Yeah, and so I'm just trying to say that how would you try to look at the trope of the developmental agencies to like pose the roads as a kind of developmental tool or something like that. And Soumita, thank you for your presentation. But I would just like to ask one or two observations, that is relating to Devjani Bhattacharya's work on property
Sorry,
thinking.
Devjani Bhattacharya's
Work on property thinking, where property became an important way how the colonial administration organized the colonial Calcutta by hydrological engineering and in the Bengal tidal delta, and how that created kind of speculative property designs. And that is another way of looking at organizing Calcutta, don't you think so, apart from the roads? And also in terms of looking at Mumbai, which is starkly different in the colonial times and also today from Kolkata, during the bubonic plague, the colonial administration kind of followed towards a scattering policy so that resistance cannot be consolidated. But in Calcutta, we see congestion happening. So why don't you think that the colonial administration followed the kind of logic of scattering the location, or like increasing the size of the city, or like organizing the city in such a way, planning the city in such a way, so that the consolidation of protest doesn't happen? Wellington Street is an important place for protest, you can say. Anyways, those are the questions that I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Atreya. I'm just going to respond to both questions first before the speakers take them up, because I'd really like you to expand on your own papers instead of responding to why didn't you write this other paper. Right? Because in a sense, Atreya, I understand your question, but to say why are you looking at congestion and not at scattering means that there is only one singular modality to look at the city, which I don't think Soumita's paper does. Similarly, I think the beauty of ANISA's paper is in how she's looking at roadness into streetness, into multiplicity, as opposed to developmentalism. So I would really appreciate questions that don't ask speakers, why are you writing your own paper and not this other paper? But that's just my comment on it, because I find this a regular kind of rhetorical question answer thing. I'm very interested in the beauty of both these papers. So I would really like people to focus on them. But of course, I don't want to speak for either of you. So feel free to respond at leisure to these questions. Any other questions? Okay, in which case, Soumita, before I do my comment, Soumita, ANISA. Yes, sorry.
So sorry.
Yeah,
there's
you.
one.
Yes.
Hello, am I audible, visible? Hi.
Yes, Sharika, you are
Sure.
audible and visible.
All right. Hi. First of all, thank you for the for something you said it better than me. But my question is for Anisha. Firstly, I really like the vivid picture that you painted of the entire region and I think that's the word to use. I was just wondering, since that, and I'm assuming that since it's a hill station, it might it may be logically I was wondering these
Sharika, you
kind
are
of
not very clearly audible. Your voice is breaking a lot. So would you mind just typing in the questions perhaps and I can read them out?
uh right, yeah, sure. Give me a minute. I'll just check it out. Yeah, sure.
Sure. And while you're doing that, Soumita, Anisha, if you want to respond to Atria's comments, please. I did not mean to steal your stage space.
Um, I guess Anisa was saying something, so if I don't mind going after her. Like,
Okay.
I was just about to say the same for you, actually, but that's fine. That's okay. Firstly, thank you, Atya, for the questions and for the suggestions as well. All right, like you had a lot of suggestions, like in terms of language, Nepal, and the chicken's neck geographical, importance and all. I understand that, and I also understand that there has been lots of work that is coming up in terms of chicken neck, right? But how many stories have you heard from this frontier that always overlooked in terms of Kalimpong? Have you even heard about Kalimpong? If yes, I'd be very happy. But I'd be very happy. Last in the east, going to regions of Darjeeling. Like you heard about Darjeeling, you've heard about its areas. But yeah, but I understand your whole perception about space and time that you're talking about, which I'll probably be presenting in some other conference, which is about time to kind of think with it. Like, does it help me at all? You know, because first, at this whole idea of road, right? And I was having grown in this place, I'm not seeing that in the other places I studied, right? Like, so that was a bit of a confusion for me. So I'm trying to understand that, okay, like this is the road, what is this road or not? How do you understand it in terms of the language of it also? How do people use, because we don't say road, we might say something else now, like, but that doesn't get articulated every single time in the English language. Like in short. So I'm trying to bring it up. I think this is the first step. So probably I'll take it up further as I go forward. And I'd be very interested, like, and I really appreciate Professor saying that it's just one part of the larger project that you're presenting here, right? And the development angle, the other angle doesn't fit in my larger project, which later on, if we have time, I'll explore and just mention a bit about as well. Yeah. I don't want to take the time, Soumita. You can go ahead. But I'll definitely specific portions that you talked about. Yeah. Thank you so much, Atria.
um, so to respond to Atriya's first question, which says that, property as the organizing unit of the 20th century Calcutta, I would actually say that, when we are talking about planning of Calcutta in the early 20th century with the coming of the CIT, the entire idea of planning the city is about how property relations are being redefined, defined and redefined by the building exercise of CIT. So if you look into the CIT archives, which are now open for public access, you would actually see how the property relations were negotiated through litigations for this building activities. So it is true that one can actually see, property or the rent economy as a marker for, building of or making of planned spaces in Calcutta in the 20th century. So it is something possible. You cannot ignore you cannot ignore the works of CIT and its property relation during this time. There are also a couple of work which has happened on this respect. So that is there. But of course, I mean, you can look at it in that way, but that's not. So I have worked with CIT materials. I do look into it, but not through the property angle. And in terms of the scattering policy, I don't know how to respond to it, because when I'm mentioning that, CIT was involved in building Calcutta according to the Haussmannian Paris model. So that idea of sending resistance to the background is already mentioned. It's understood. It's implicit when I'm saying that the Haussmannian Paris model was adopted for building of Calcutta. So we all know how Haussmannian Paris came, like Haussmann designed Paris in terms of giving sort of like keeping resistance out of the city. So it is there. I am already mentioning it. And if you look into the history of resistance in Calcutta in the 20th century, like it's a protracted history of anti-imperialist struggle, starting from the Swadeshi till from like the partition and post-partition riots. So, see, the violence and clash on the streets are becoming so defined that transport and traffic, the way they are being disrupted, and at that particular point of time, and also during the Second World War phase, CIT was not building Calcutta anymore. They are repeatedly saying in their reports that, for the dearth of resources, for the turbulent times, the planning is taking a backseat. So when they are not in a position to plan to build, definitely, curbing resistance at that point of time was not in their mind. It was there when they were talking about building Calcutta on Haussmannian model, but that's implicit, as I mentioned. So I think that's it to respond to your questions. Sorry, I
Muted, unmuted. Sorry, thank you both. I'm quickly going to read out Sharayu's question in the chat window. She wanted to know, and I think Anisha, this is to you. The Kalimpong region may be ecologically sensitive as well if ecological or sustainable discourses have added to the messiness you mentioned. Do local/global mobilizations take place around such resources?
Should I answer? Okay. Thank you, Sharayu, for the question. And it's a very important question, and something that I've been thinking with recently as well, because I've also realized, I think it might be Soumita, that what you're writing about is not distant. Right? What we're writing about is something that we are currently living at as well. So also, like, I don't know how many people know about it here, but 2 or 3 days back, there was an earthquake on this site. So there was an earthquake of 5.1 or 6 point. The range was somewhere around 5.1 to 6 magnitude. And the first thought was, oh my God, the buildings that they are going to make in the roadside, beside the road, is it going to sustain itself or not? So definitely these are also changing, because there's been a lot of infrastructural developments happening around these particular areas, and the densification that is happening also gives a lot of scope for the studies on these areas. And this global mobilization has also been very much articulated through migration, specifically from people moving from this region outside, right? And then to study, to either work for better opportunities, or whatever you like to call it. People move outside to work, and then when they come back, there's this sense of movement that is also happening, definitely. Yeah. And ideally, if it was if I had a good internet connection, if I was presenting it in person, then I really wanted to have a map and then go through with it with the pictures and all, but I realized it's gonna get really bad with the internet, so I'm not going to enter into that zone at all. Yeah, but and Sharayu, if you have any questions on that, I'd be very happy to take it up. You to me, that's I'm completely okay. And just it's not. I'm very finicky about the names, and it's Kalimpong. I might be pronouncing it like a little weirdly. It's Kalil. It's just a thing. I'm a little.
with good reason, as you ought to be. Thank you both. I'm sorry, my connection is a little bit iffy, so I hope I'm audible.
Yeah. Yeah. You are.
Any last questions we're missing? How are we doing on time, team?
Ma'am, I think we can go take another extra 5 minutes if needed. Our next session starts at
Okay,
4:15.
Superb. So then let me just take 5 minutes to sort of summarize my comments on both your excellent papers. And then if you have responses or expansions, it'd be wonderful to hear them. What I found really lovely was how both your papers, in a sense, while using different terminology, there's obstruction, congestion, choke point, all of these are about direct challenges to something that has already been overturned over time, which is the question of flow itself. Right? The overarching theorization of flow as something that is almost teleologically obvious is easily challenged by both historical and contemporary constructions of cityness, roadness, streetness, as the case may be. And both of you are beautifully demonstrating as to how choking, obstructing, contingency, all of these come with implicit assumptions of choking for who, obstruction for who, nuisance for who. The unsaid part of this equation also gestures to something that we've been discussing overall in this conference, which is space comes imbued with intent and power. And each of your works, through your wonderful historical archival reading, Soumita, and through your contemporary ethnographic rendition, ANISA, show that we are always going back and forth in the movements of power. There is a deterritorialization and a reterritorialization, to sort of summarize the Dolce and Gabbana of post-structural theory, Deleuze and Guattari. Yeah, and in each of your arguments, I found a fantastic tendency towards messiness, towards saying, I don't know. I don't know exactly how this went or it's going to go, but there is an interesting binary that undercuts both. With Kalimpong, and I hope I'm saying it right, ANISA, there is the marginality that is constantly seeking to be overturned. It is a road, it is a highway, but people live here, which means it's local, it's not global, it's a streetness. And I was remembering Walter Benjamin's wonderful work with Venice, which speaks about the flow into the streets and where are the clothes hanging, who's doing what. There's Karen Kolo's work in the kind of resettlement areas of Chennai, which also speaks about there is no clear division between public and private. These are areas with very specific, rich local histories that are then intersected by roadness or nationalness or national global modernity, as the case may be. The same binary seems to intersect yours as well, Soumita, in a different way, because this is a colonial forcible movement towards the modern city, hence Houseman. Right? Houseman makes the predictable entry because you're trying to superimpose this idea of the grid upon an existing palimpsest of histories and intentions and movements and people. So there is also a resistance of a city of a different kind that will not become a city and creates a nuisance and obstructs things. Yeah. So we are constantly dealing with a binary that will not conform to this binary. And in this, I think it becomes therefore very important for me to ask you both, where are your projects going? These are small parts of an argument, and both your papers are beautifully written. I read them both with great interest. I would really like to see you both sharpen the argument. Because with ANISA, I think you're showing a road is not necessarily a street is not necessarily a road, it gets messy. Yeah. Can I push you to say more? And so what? And I'm asking it in all sincerity, not at all in any kind of rhetorical mode. I really want to know. So where are you heading with this? Soumita, similarly for you, I want to know, and I think it's nice that this question of scattering and colonial governmentality has come as a kind of foil to it, because you're telling a different story of a city. It's not always about governance and governmentality. It's also about infrastructure itself as posing very real resistance. And I'm thinking of the work of Brian Larkin in Nigeria, who speaks about cinema infrastructure. about moving film. So infrastructure takes on a life of its own. And that lifeness is represented very well in the kind of cases and litigation that's coming about. So with you, I'm asking the same boring question again. Where is this argument going? I'd love to hear more about it. And those are my closing comments. And I want to thank you beforehand for taking the time to present your wonderful work. And please do say more about your larger projects. ANISA, do you want to go first?
I think I went first earlier, so why don't Soumita go ahead first, if it's okay.
How lovely it is to be on a panel of like courteous, wonderful people.
Yeah.
Soumita.
So since my larger project involves with the traffic governmentality of a colonial city, of a late colonial city maybe, because when Calcutta is actually coming up as a planned city is after 1911, when it is no longer the capital of the British Raj. So at that point of time, we see that a new sort of vigor is infused in its development, in its planning, which coincides with the popularization of automobiles in the city itself. So my larger work is into this, it's digging up this dynamics, is based on this dynamics, that how Calcutta as a city in the early 20th century is coming in shape after it has lost its the status of being the second city of the empire. And here I find a very interesting link to follow. That is the involvement of the business houses, the European business commerce houses, the managing agencies, which if we look into the works of Omkar Goswami, would actually reiterate how this time the Marwari dominance post the First World War, after they had gained this economic mobility through this fatka trade, through the jute, the dominating the jute trade in the eastern side, how the concentration of capital in their hands is sort of posing a threat to this European merchant houses, and how at this point of time these business groups are aligning with the government, with the police more and more, and sort of investing into the civic affairs of the city. So this is the note. So I kind of try to see how business, because generally we tend to see the city, its traffic movement in terms of human mobility, in terms of this vehicular mobility, where sort of human there's a kind of an interface between the human and the vehicles. So my point is that, like, once I started, I also I have no issues in admitting that my entry point in this project was also through this, that how I travel in the city. It never came to me that how Fred traveled in the city. So that was my entry point, that how I am crisscrossing, how I am traversing the city. And that took me to this point, that at the Calcutta, which was at the node of the empire, how it is, sort of developing itself, where this business is forming a very important question, even when the city has lost its, imperial status in that way. So which is why I have seen that it is very important to sort of decode this very ubiquitous words. And as I mentioned, that in case of Calcutta's traffic, these words are so important and they are so repetitive that it is very important to sort of decode them, to understand them. And I've mentioned that the way these words are linked with the spatial demarcation of the city, the way the kind of the city organizes itself, I think that, business forms a very important role. And these words are like obstruction, congestion, and nuisance, the kind of words which I used here, are not only commercial words or used in the commercial context. They are like this is only a section of what I have presented, or like a section of my chapter, where I also show that they are also very like the words which are used in a very common sense way, the words which are also moved with human movements, they are a very well part. So so this is basically the overlapping nature. So my work is to present the overlapping nature of a city's development, where business plays an important role, but there are human voices as well. There is this everydayness as well. There is this very layman sort of an interpretation of the city, like this business nodes things which, like, we say that this is the economic hub of the city, this is the European hub, this is the Indian business merchants place. They also embed a sort of everydayness, the mundane everyday that Anisa was talking about, where people.
Soumita, I'm sorry, you're muted. You got muted in between. I'm sorry.
Oh, am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Am I? So I don't know what you guys missed and where it got muted.
No, we got most of it. We just the last few words. That's all.
Yeah. So it's like even in that mundane everyday contains the business motivations for one group, whereas for the others, it's like some random cow moving and sort of obstructing their way and sort of curving their right of way. So that is basically my larger work. So my larger work is to bring out this contradiction, this overlappingness, and to see how a city sort of, as it has been now, had its roots during this first half, and mostly when it has lost its imperial status. So
thanks very much. That makes a lot of it clear. And I think it really sort of helps bridge also, an originally Weberian understanding of cityness, but then brings in all of these complications to speak about the ascendancy of different sets of stakeholders and competing claims between them in a very, very different era and with different sets of power relations. So thank you, Soumita. Thank you so much. Anisa, all yours.
So I see a lot of overlaps in terms of Soumita's work and mine in different ways. Like it's like I see it as hers being a macro scale in a way, and mine being a bit micro in a way in terms of the space, the size. Like I'm audible, right? Like it's just weird.
You are.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, so like you said that you presented a section of your chapter. So what I have done is I think merged many sections of my thesis in a way, in this, because what I have basically what my dissertation looks at is it's kind of a dialogue between the past and the present. And what I've tried to do there is I've tried to, like, basically the road was the entry point for me, right? Because when I presented my defense, when I presented my proposal, and they were like, oh, it's all fine that you're going to be, like researching on this place, 10th mile, but what are you going to be doing there? Was the question, right? And that was the question for me as well. Yes, what will I be doing? Great, fantastic idea. But then I realized in the fieldwork that what I was doing was I was walking a lot, right? So I was walking in this road. I was having conversation with the people. I was having, like, some were saying there's monkey coming every single day. Some were saying there's, like every day nuisances, like you were saying, that was happening. So all of that in a way, what it did was, I was like, it gave me an entry point. So one of the major issues was that there is no particular larger ethnographic work that talks about the place at its present stage. All the conversations that are there is largely historical. And even when historical, it's very one dimensional in terms of the Tibetan trade identity and networks. So I see that there's a gap between their conversation being in terms of the past Tibetan trade or the future aspiration of Gorkha land. That is a separate state. But what is happening in between, like, we don't know about it, what's happening in between, right? So that made me go into this whole dialogue of, like, how was this place made? And then the question of infrastructure came in. And the idea of placemaking, as in like, okay, so the infrastructure was built so that you could enter into this place, right? So-called no man's land place that I mentioned in the paper. So then through that, there were lots of other interaction that started happening. So basically, I think my dissertation also looks at in terms of placemaking and placemaking in different ways. And it explores the idea of loss. Because every time that I spoke to people, everyone was like, what Kalimpong used to be, it no longer is. But what does it mean, right? Like Soumita was talking about how Calcutta lost it. Like I've also heard that about Calcutta in terms of, it has one foot in its old past and one foot in its 20th, 21st century. But what does that mean? How does the place itself develop through it, right? So one chapter of it is on infrastructure, where I look at, okay, so it's my thesis is basically taking you on a journey in this is how you talk about this particular place, and I problematize the notion that it is dimensional. It doesn't take into account different of which is diverse, as diverse as it can. And then it moves on towards, okay, so you've already created a lost place, but then what is happening in this lost place, right? So then we move, introduces you to this, how this road was built. And when Shomit, I really enjoyed your paper, by the way. And I was writing notes and all,
Same
okay,
here.
this also seems very, like when you mentioned to abolish a cart stand, I was like, oh, okay, abolishing a cart stand in Calcutta, but that was what was used to enter Kalimpong. So even the landscape, kind of like played a role, right? So
Yes.
I think it made sense, and I don't know if I have time. So like that was how it started, and then it moves, and then I also, in short, in one line, if I have to say, then my research is exploring the place and place making of Kalimpong through infrastructure, markets, and commodities. I think that's the line I'll stick with for now.
That's fantastic. Thank you both for sort of offering a window into your larger research. I would really like to see both your papers out and published, and I would suggest that you frame it in these terms, because I think this framing really helps locate the inflection points of what you're trying to do. And I would love, like I said already, I'd love to see it out in print. Good luck with all you have to present today and for being part of our conference on spatiality. Thank you, HSS team, for a
Thank
fantastic
you.
job as ever and for inviting me to moderate.
Thank you. Thank you. Same here.
Thank you all. Onward to the next panel. Team, all yours.